Good morning, all of you. Today we are going to discuss on the topic on English literature. Hello, it's Dr. Peksha from School of Liberal Education, Galgotias University. So in this topic, we are going to cover um, the brief history on evolution of English grammar, sentences, types of sentences, declarative sentences, imperative sentences, and we are also going to talk about interrogative sentences, exclamatory sentences, and there are certain examples which we'll deal in this lecture. So here are some learning objectives to name the four types of sentences and define their purposes. Identify the types of sentences. Use the correct end mark for each type of sentences and create examples for each type of sentences. Next, let us start with the introductory part. First, we'll discuss the brief history on evolution of English grammar. The history of English grammar begins late in the 16th century with the pamphlet for grammar by William Bulconer. In the early works, the structure and rules of English grammar were contrasted with those of Latin. A more modern approach incorporating phonology was introduced in the 19th century. The Dutch tradition of writing English grammars, which began with Thomas Bason's The Conjugations in English and Niedersche in the same year in 1586 as William Bulkeller's first English grammar, which was written in English, gained renewed strength in the early 20th century in the work of three grammarians, Henrik Poutsma, Etzo Cruisinger, and Reinhard Zandvoort. Here, Portsmouth's Grammar of Late Modern English, published between 1904 and 1929 and was written for continental, especially Dutch students, selected all its examples from English literature. Now we'll begin in details. A sentence is a group of words that expresses a complete meaning. A sentence is a group of words that makes complete sense. It expresses a complete thought, and also it begins with a capital letter and ends with a symbol. A sentence has at least one verb and action word. For example, Sam went to the store. There could be in total four kinds of sentences. The first is the declarative sentences, imperative sentences, exclamatory sentences, and interrogative sentences. Now, starting with the assertive sentences is also known as declarative sentences. These sentences are statements. They state or declare something. It can make either a positive or a negative statements. For example, the boy is happy. The people are running. Next, interrogative sentences. These sentences always ask a question. They end up with a question mark. For example, who is your teacher? Have you ever seen a flying fish? Next, imperative sentences. These sentences expresses orders, requests, and advice. They end up with full stops. For example, go to your room or stop. Next is exclamatory sentences. These sentences expresses strong or sudden feelings. They begin with what or how. They end up with the mark of exclamation. For example, hooray, wow, that's a great news. Hence, just talking about those simple examples, uh, declarative sentences, for example, applicants will be answered in due time. It makes a, here this statement makes a statement. In imperative sentences, show me your photo album, please. This sentence you will find that it gives a command or makes a request. In interrogative sentences, like, do you like this photo? This statement clearly asks a question. Exclamatory sentences, what a beautiful dress she is wearing. It shows strong feeling. So, declarative sentences simply makes a statement or expresses an opinion. In other words, it makes a declaration. This kind of sentences ends with a period. You will use primarily declarative sentences in your academic writing. For example, I want to be a good writer. Here you'll find that this statement is making a statement. Another example, my friend is really a good writer. In this sentence, we will find that it expresses an opinion. Next is imperative sentences. An imperative sentences always gives a command or makes a request. It usually ends with a period but can, under certain circumstances, ends with an exclamation point. Do what we all love to do. They give people directions and tell them what to do. For example of this type of sentences, please sit down. I need you to sit down now. Grab me a Greek yogurt from the sub, please. Next, talking about the interrogative sentences. And interrogative sentences ask a questions. This type of sentences often begins with who, what, where, when, why, how, or do, and it always ends with a question mark. For example, they always interrogate. That is, they ask question and ends with a question mark. For example, when are you going to turn in your writing assignments? Or do you know what the weather will be tomorrow? Next, why are we talking about question marks? All these examples you will see that they are asking a sort of questions. Next is exclamatory sentences. And exclamatory sentences is a sentence that expresses great emotions such as excitement, surprise, happiness, and anger, and ends with an exclamation point. For example, they exclaim things, or they are so exciting. For example, it is too dangerous to climb that mountain. I love my baguette sound. I love writing. Next is punctuation marks, which includes that period, question marks, and exclamation point. Next, talking about the sentence structure. A sentence structure is the way a sentence is arranged grammatically. The sentence structure of your writing includes where the noun and verb fall within an individual sentence. Sentence structure depends on the language in which you are writing or speaking. In standard American English, a basic sentence is composed of two parts. The first is subject and other is predicate. The subject of a sentence is the person or entity that does an action or is the focus of the sentence. The subject may be a proper noun, personal, or different noun linked by the predicate linked by a. The predicate is the action or description of the subject. The predicate may be a verb accompanied by helping verbs or an entire verb phrase. For instance, in the sentence, the first year student waited in the line for the farm to table special. The noun phrase, the first year student, would be the subject and waited in the line for the farm to table special would be the predicate. An easy way to distinguish the subject and predicate of a sentence is to ask yourself what is being done. That is predicate, and ask yourself what is doing that action. That is subject. Next, talking about the types of sentence structure, there are basically four types of sentence structure. The first is the simple, compound, complex, and compound complex. Each sentence is defined by the use of independent and dependent clauses, conjunctions, and subordinators. Talking about the simple sentences, a simple sentence is an independent clause with no conjunction or dependent clause. Structure refers to the order of ideas. The progression of your writing should feel smooth with similar points linked together. Structuring your work is a key aspect of good academic writing, ensuring that related sections are linked together and that the ideas and arguments progress in a logical and orderly manner. One note is there that sentence structure is important to keep in mind while you are writing, because strong writing typically employs sentences of varied type and length. Writers can also strategically use certain sentence structures to convey meaning to a reader beyond the meaning of the words alone. Next, the simple sentences has the most basic element that makes it a sentence, a subject, a verb, and a completed thought. A simple sentences can also be referred to as an independent clause. It is referred to as an independent because While it might be part of a compound or complex sentence, it can also stand by itself as a complete sentence. Simple sentences contains one clause. It also contains a subject and a verb, and it may also have an object and modifiers. For example, she wrote. It's a complete sentence, a kind of simple sentence. She completed her literature review. Another, he organized his sources of theme. Next, we'll talk about the compound sentences. A compound sentences refers to a sentence made up of two independent clauses or complete sentences connected to one another with a coordinating conjunctions. Coordinating conjunctions are easy to remember if you think of the word span boys. For examples of compound sentences includes the following, like Joy waited for the train, but the train was late. I looked for Mary and Samantha at the bus station, but they arrived at the station before noon and left on the bus before I arrived. Another examples, like Mary and Samantha arrived at the bus station before noon and they left on the bus before I arrived. Mary and Samantha left on the bus before I arrived, so I did not see them at the bus station. Hence, here we find that coordinating conjunctions are useful for connecting sentences, but compound sentences often are overused. While coordinating conjunctions can indicate some type of relationships between the two independent clauses in the sentence, which do not indicate much of a relationship. Next, we'll talk about the complex sentences. A complex sentence is made up of an independent clause and one or more dependent clauses connected to it. A dependent clause is similar to an independent clause or complete sentences, but it lacks one of the elements that would make it a complete sentence. Dependent clauses such as those above cannot stand alone as a sentence, but they can be added to an independent clause to form a complex sentence. Examples of dependent clauses include the following. Because Mary and Samantha arrived at the bus station before noon, while he waited at the train station after they left on the bus. The term periodic sentences is used to refer to a complex sentence beginning with a dependent clause and ending with an independent clause, as in while he waited at the train station, Joy realized that the train was late. Periodic sentences can be especially effective because the completed thought occurs at the end of it, so the first part of the sentence can build up to the meaning that comes at the end. Here we'll see that dependent clauses begins with subordinating conjunctions because below there are some of the most common subordinating conjunctions like after, although, as, because, before, even though, if, since, though, unless, until, when, whenever, whereas, wherever, and while. Just to revise that a complex sentences joins an independent clause with one or more dependent clauses. The dependent clause can go first in the sentence followed by the independent clause as in the following. Like when the dependent clause comes first, a comma should be used to separate the two clauses. For example, because Mary and Samantha arrived at the bus station before noon, I did not see them at the station. While he waited at the train station, Joy realized that the train was late. After they left on the bus, Mary and Samantha realized that Joy was waiting at the train station. Now, conversely, the independent clauses can go first in the sentence, followed by the dependent clause, as in the following. Like when the independent clause comes first, a comma should not be used to separate the two clauses. I did not see them at the station because Mary and Samantha arrived at the bus station before noon. Joe realized that the train was late while he waited at the train station. Mary and Samantha realized that Joy was waiting at the train station after they left on the bus. You'll find that complex sentences are often more effective than compound sentences because a complex sentence indicates clearer relationship between the main part of the sentence, The word before, for instance, tells readers that one thing or one word such as although conveys a more complex relationship than a word such as and conveys. Next is compound complex sentences. This kind of sentence types can also be combined. A compound complex sentence contains at least two independent clauses and at least one dependent clause. Independent clauses are really cool, but sometimes they get too long when you add too much of information. Like she completed her literature review, but she still needs to work on her methods section, even though she finished her methods course last semester. Although he organized his sources by theme, he decided to arrange them chronologically and he carefully followed the meal plan for organization. Another example, um, with pizza and soda at hand, they studied APA rules for many hours and they decided that writing in APA made sense because it was clear, concise, and objective. Now, using some complex compound sentences writing allows for more sentence variety. Hence, throughout this lecture, you can just deal through certain important questions like defining sentences and evaluate its various types, evaluate imperative sentences, or explain some examples of integrative sentences, or the most important that state the difference between declarative and imperative sentences. Here are the references from where I quoted or where I've referred these materials. You can just go through it. Thank you.